we want to discuss this problem. So we have this big box. And Tashi is pushing on the box. And Sonam has a rope and he's pulling on the box. But the box is not moving. So one force is the force that Sonam is exerting on the box. So this is a force that's on the box by Sonam. There's also another force on the box in this direction. Tashi is over here pushing on the box, but I'm still going to draw the arrow over here. The arrow starts in the middle of the box and goes out. And this is a force. It's on the box by Tashi. But the box is not moving. So from your own experience in life, why would the box not be moving? Okay, because it's of its weight?
Yeah. Because it's too heavy to move.
Because it's too heavy?
So, okay, what he's saying is like all forces on all sides are equal. That's why it's equal to 0.
Okay, so he has a good point. He's saying all the forces are equal to 0 and therefore it's not moving.
So both forces from both sides are equal. That's why it's equal to 0.
But we have two forces going in this direction.
What
are the forces then going in this direction?
The box is exerting force in the opposite direction.
The box is exerting a force in the opposite direction. Caused by what?
It's the box.
It's the box?
It's the box itself.
Can you push on me? So if I sit in this chair, I have a certain weight. And Stamatis can push on the chair. And we can go all around the room. But I can also put my feet down. And now Stamatis can push on me. And it's very hard for him to make me move. Did my gravitational force change?
Yes, it has changed.
Really?
Only your rest.
Wait.
Okay, few of them are saying it has not changed, but most of them are saying yes, it's changed.
Did my weight change?
Ni jise jiu guess elas. No.
So what changed?
Khare gyur yoresa. Khare nedang yodore. The situation has changed.
The situation has changed. But what about the situation has changed?
Like nedang yodosh lan khare yodoshasa. Kambasal shani, because your feet is touching the ground.
My feet are touching the ground. And what's happening when my feet are touching the ground?
Kya di thanda Bryce kurang kangba di masala thuyura di res lara thuwa ina khari res. Sumanyam jabar home du chik song. Kambasal shadi kha chigre. Darshu khola. Darshu kholer. Kholer darshu. Darshu dikha chigre. Darshu mangro joyres kangba disal shadi. So when your feet touch the ground, there is more frictional force. That's why
Friction.
yeah, that's why it has stopped.
What-
It was difficult to move.
So can we write on the board, what is the word for friction in Tibetan? So this is an important idea.
The samju khechumbu nedun khechumbu cha deures.
So if Tashi is pushing on the box and Sonam is pulling on the box,
Gam dilata shi buba che thana shi sunam gi thingi yorwas.
what is the force that is resisting those two forces?
Ta khurani ga shuk gya de da. Dil do be yan shuk ji yorwa kangi roj. Di khari res. Tenshu. Darshu, frictional force
It's a frictional force.
resisting these two forces.
And what is that frictional force acting on?
Ta darshu yor lara. Darshu di khol gya de res. On the earth.
What
and
object
the
is
feet.
it asking on? My feet. Yes. But in this case, what is it acting on?
Tanda ta kamba di mendalas tanda di nedan di lain baina darshu lara ngobu kharigal darshu di shuk gya res in between the box and the earth.
It's between the box and the earth, right? It's
And the ground.
the box and the ground, right? The box and the floor.
Ta di shala rocha shawana shala di da gam di para darshu di yorwas.
How do you want to label that? Do you want to label with the little F or
F with an F.
right?
So let's draw how big should
If I'm going to draw one arrow for it?
just one.
If I'm going to draw one arrow to represent this frictional force, how long should that arrow be?
Ta tanda darshu yoresung ra. Darshu di ta ngzu removal ma ku yo da tunda temba inas da di ringlo khagas tu yores. Darshu gi da jora ande. Khandes? Okay, 50% upwards, 50% downwards.
Okay. Any other ideas?
Ani shemba chik di gyajang apchu ya gyajang apchu ma sunsra. Ani shemba yo edi mainde.
When I sat in the chair or stood on the skateboard and I held the two springs and I didn't move, the force in this hand was equal to the force in this hand.
Yela thanda kholo yo diga zaswa. Diga jadu kala 초 니가 니테로 텐두 니가 찍고 치게 인도 갈라 구조 땅 마소스
So the box is not moving.
딜라드 나 감디 구조 땅게 요 마레스
So how big does this force need to be so that the box does not move? How big does the frictional force need to be? How long must I draw this arrow?
ता 감디 구조 땅게 요 마레 라라 구조 땅게 요 마레 라도 킨소 दर्शु दी के गिरे लारा ता दर्शु गी दच टिंगुरा दिशु गी रिंगसे खागस कोगो रेस खांदी द चिको खांदी द चिको बर equal to both
Equal to this one plus this one.
니가 dombe re khandes 니가 relani 니가 dombe shukche ra odi da chikba boresra okay la 니가 dombe re tashi chikbu ko jire khandere yeah equal to sum of these two forces
So if I drew the arrow like this, it would be equal to either one of the other arrows, or I can draw the arrow like this. Which one is correct?
ta khandi ta da di re las ta da ni to so shuk de khanda darshu gi shuk jora di ring se thangbo di thyo ina yana tashi yana sonom di ni ga chikba chai do chik nyam do khorani khaurun chik da chikba chai yo res yamena ring le digas thyo res khandi ta da di res kang de re o de the lower one.
The lower one, okay. This is the good thing about a whiteboard. See, you can draw two things and then easily erase.
Karban la na kheju di res thi chen ta na shi sup chu chu res.
So this this is a force, so we write a big F.
Di shuk chungu ras chezani f chungu di thigi is.
And we're going to make a little baby F here to represent it called its friction.
Ta thanda darshuk re la de ra di shuk di an cheza darshuk la frictional force la ora di chhe lan f chunju jigang la thi is.
This is the frictional force. It's acting on the box. It's acting on the box.
Di darshuk di shuk di khawal gya de la na gam gal gya de res.
And what's causing it?
Ta di gyu di khari cha de res shuk gyange di su cha de res. Mar darshuk di la gorda darshuk ta shi jawa gyasa darshuk gyasa da gam di ra gyage su re la gorda gyu di the ground the floor.
The floor. See, I had to look to my guru for confirmation.
Tarta yeme ngara gege la thi sadi kran zu lendi.
So this is the force of friction on the box by the floor.
Thanda di darshu di khari chungur la na gam gala darshu khagas kya yeme jura thanda sai ya gya gyo di chungur res.
So worth having this much of the drawing down in your notebook.
Di rumu di kya zo thanda ma thide na thishana ya hu res.
But wait,
Ntis gua sonsa.
are we missing any forces?
Thande shuk dinala ma changyo duesa thande shuk yor res engyo. Yes, there is.
What are we missing?
Khari changamundu khari dangamundu sadi. Gravitational.
Okay, so there's a force of gravity, right?
Theshuk di yor was tela.
It's acting on what object?
Di ngobo khari gala shuk gya de res. Kyasa di? On the box.
It's acting on the box by what?
Kyage su rela shuk gyagin di. By the earth.
By Earth. We know that forces come in pairs. So what is the other force?
Shuk shemba khari res. Upward force.
It's an upward force. How long is the arrow I should draw?
Ta gangla shuk gyari rasu ra. Di ringdung hagas tu res dadi. Khari da chikwa. They should be the same length as.
Same length as the other one? Okay. So this is also a force.
Di shuk jiruas.
It's a force that's acting on what?
Di khari gala shuk gya de res.
On the box. We really care about the box.
Manzo gam la simde shu yor talasti.
And what is causing this force?
Di gyu di khari cha diores, gyage shu gyage khari cha diores. La lung sa shala re sa re khare sa khare di thanda di shala re se phola re khare shala by floor.
The floor. So this is the force on the box by the floor. So there are, how many forces are acting on this box?
Ta di ta du gala thanda shu khaju dos dinala mangnu khaju do 5 forces.
Wait. How many arrows do we have here?
Ta dinal da khaju dosa 5.
5. And you notice that the forces in the vertical direction, they're equal and opposite, so they add up to 0.
Dila du gala do cholo yo da ni do dini ani khari la na shu se chipa ra thana shi do cho do ga da di du gala an chipa cha de res.
The forces in the horizontal direction, this force plus this force equals this friction force.
Thana shi ya di su sum ta wa na di ye chola do shu ni di thana shi yen cholo yo di dini dom ba da di chik bi chipa cha de res.
It's almost like there are no forces acting on the box.
Dila du gala shuk che ta thanda gyamya ro shi thung yo res.
Because all these forces cancel each other.
Khaila na phal su changma thanda shuk ji do pensu kha ji ore sel ru yo res.
We say the overall effect is as if there's no forces, but there are forces acting on the box.
Ta ye shuk yo ra shuk gya de res ne pensu changma ta du gala nyam do ta du gala thama del khari yo la na shuk me ro shi thung yo res shuk gen di.
This is a good drawing to have in your book.
Di rimu di su su thide na thina yapo yo res.
So we have these 5 forces.
Ta thanda ngazo del shuk nga yo ruas.
I want you to notice that on every force we have force on box, force on box, force on box, force on box, force on box.
Del shuk mangbu shten dos shuk ri re ta wa na changma khari yo la na gam gi gang la shuk 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 la changma gam gang shuk ni tengyo jora dik tu yo res.
Now we have said that all forces arise as interactions between two objects.
Ta ngazo khadu na ta thanda shuk la di khadu yungur la wa na ngobu ni thedu gala shuk tu yo la jora di chagi yo ros.
Tashi is pushing on the box,
Gam dila tashi gi bigu yo res.
and so we know that the box is pushing on Tashi.
Ta dila du ngazo khari ha gor la na gam gi thana shi tashi la pha bigu yo res.
The force that the box exerts on Tashi, we would draw it on which object's diagram?
Ta thanda gam gi pha tashi la shuk ji ba gya yo la ra dila wa na ani ngobu khari gan thibu yo res. On tashi
On Tashi's diagram.
ta remote thidu gala ta shuk di gala gyare la jora di remote thisa khari ga thigor la na tashi da de remote thigra di na thibu yo res.
We would not draw it on this diagram, we would draw it on Tashi's diagram.
Ta wondi remote di khadu ligir la na shuk gi thanda da jora di tashi da de thanda tashi da shuk gyasa tashi chagyo na di remote na thibu yo res da di.
This force, the other force that corresponds to this one, we would draw it on which object's diagram?
Ta di shuk di ro pe cha wa na di thanda do be ya shuk ji li ros di ani ngobo khari ga la li res shuk di shuk gyasa khari ga li res on the earth.
On the earth. And we would draw the third law force pair to this force in whose diagram?
Ta di ro cha cha wa na ya shuk gyasa jora ya khari ga sui rimuna li res On Sonam's diagram.
Is Sonam exerting a force on the box?
Sonam gi gam gala shuk gegi yor wes. Yes.
I don't think so.
Nga gegi yo mare sambu dus.
Sonam is not touching the box.
Sonam gi gam la lawa cha yo mares.
The rope is touching the box.
Thakwa di kuba di nyamdu rek cha tu di ros.
So, strictly speaking, this would be a force on the box by the rope.
Ta tidam ta da chiwa ina di gam gala shuk gegi di gegi khari cha di re dela thakwa di cha di res.
By the rope.
Thakwa di cha gi ros shuk gegi.
Human beings cannot exert forces from a distance.
Ta mi ro cha sha ina thar ngun gyangda ring buni shuk gya tu marwas.
They need to be touching to be exerting forces.
Ta shuk ji khesi tung gu na injim ji tuye jora tu gu res.
So, on which objects diagram would the third law force pair of this force be drawn?
Ta shuk shemba jora dela di khesi remove din nang ko gu na remove khandi na su res undi. Thaingo la sonam soi ba lanjo ta khari yo to yora khari gu res. On the rope.
So, let's think about this. Each one of these forces, of these 5 forces, has another force that is Newton's third law force pair.
Ta thenda dela shuk nga tu ndo tinzo rire lemba ina thanda ya indugal khurang gi chala ya shimba jora chik chik yor was thama Newton gi tendin sumba gi draw ina to down di.
But those forces do not appear on this diagram, they appear on other objects' diagrams.
Shuk yo rete ine thanda remove dinang la chu mares remove shimba na chu res tinzo.
So we decided that because this is not moving, the sum of all the forces acting on it must be equivalent to no force acting on it.
Dila du shuk gegi yor wela na gam digal shuk gegi yores ine kyondom ta du gala shuk thanda dinang nga tu ndo sangme domba ina digi thanda kyondom ma shugen ta du gala shuk ma gya da chiba shugen tigi yores.
So then, in order to think about the forces on an object that does not move, we must say that all the forces that are acting on it must combine to 0.
Dila du ta ngobo khande jine gu yo tangi mewa ina digal shuk gyangi yo ba ina shuk gya jo jura di sangma domba ina thama di khari ligor lana legor chagi yo ji chungu yores.
Is that okay?
Seu cha sadi.
So, we talked about several things.
Ta ngazu ne de mangbu thola ta tharing she yores.
First of all, we identified the individual forces
Thangbo ngazu ta shuk rere ngazu mujin chires.
and we realized that we were missing one force.
Ta dinde tagi tagi drudu gala ngazu khari hakor lana shuk chik changi me ngazu sorres.
And that force had to be in the opposite direction to these two,
Khari hakor lana shuk chik ma sa di handa dela shuk ni tun josh da di do ve shuk ji yo ngazu hakor res.
and should be in strength equal to the sum of these two.
Ta na shi shuk ki shuk se jora di khande ji yo ji hakor la waina thanda di ni ga dombe shuk se jora dinde imba cha hakor res.
So let's see what would happen if somebody goes and puts oil right there between the two surfaces.
Ta nedang dila thanda mi chi droni dela num ji ma sho inas.
Suddenly, the surfaces are slippery,
Dilado di ngoi di kharchigre jamshu chai roas.
and this now does not stay still.
Ni jamshu chadu gala di sonne ding mares.
So let's say that the rope is pulling with the same force and Tashi is pushing with the same force.
Thana shi ni thakba di the che thana shi tashi bigu ra. Dini ga shubse nyen da chibo jigyan chi shubse chibo jigyan cha de res.
So this will be the same in the two situations.
Ta nedang ngamaj da chima juya nigal chikpa yo res shubse di.
This will be the same in the two situations.
Thana shi di niwa di chikpa res nedang nigal.
Will this be the same in the two situations?
Ta nedang thangbo da niwa ni ten sa. Dini chikpa res ta di chikpa di res. Some are saying yes, some no.
Does the earth care about if you have put oil or you have not put oil?
Say kolar keba sur welas ta kerangi thanda digala num chu na re mena re. No.
No, it is the same box, like Bryce La did. It is the same box. When I put the box on the scale, it would read the same thing.
Ni the price ke peso shaw na shi chikba chikya roas. Mo bu di ni la khande yo na shi thanda thanda zo jise ta oi na ni ni khari yo na shi chikba chikya thungu res.
So this will be the same in the two situations.
Di la du di chi do sumba di ne dang thangbo da ni wa ni ga na chikpa yo res.
How about this one?
Ta di shibash do gang tu nyu di. Ne dang thangbo da ni wa ni ga chikpa yo re lo yo res. Same.
This one will stay the same.
Di chikpa di res.
This one.
Ta de la chik do thama di. Di kheba du re yan chikpa yo res. This will change.
And will it become bigger or smaller?
Ta yuwa dure la ra. Yuwa dure ina di shuk di chero dure ma chag res. It becomes lower.
So it will become smaller. It will become smaller,
Da di thung ru ruas.
and there will not be the sum of all the forces equal to 0 anymore.
Ta di da di thung ru sa. Di la du jela khyondum da du gala. Thama di ta domba ina lego dig ma ruas.
And the box will start to move.
Di la du gala lego ma du gala gam di yogu chi yo res.
So this is an important idea.
Di ne du kechim bu res.
For something not to move, the sum of all the forces must be equal to 0.
Kesi ma chi wa ina ngo boji. An di thanda shu khazu yo ina. Di la gya yo shu di thandom khari chagor la na changma nyam do domba ina legor chag yo res.
If it is not equal to 0, then its motion will change.
Kesi legor memba ina ani yogu ta da di gyo do jura di yungu yo res.
Okay?
Seo cha so sa di.
Are there any questions?
The chua yo na. There is a question at the back.
도쇼 슈츠리리 레고라 춘냠도 도쇼 슈츠냠도 레고라 제가 다 아니 슈츠 제로 마차야지 내고 jin고를 sla고데 페나 쇼금 텔라 월 눔슈 점을 코 구주게 내고 jin고라 디디 콘조 네 가르선 제로 차고 말슬라소 슈즈 덤비 슈즈 차냐 차 pen 단다 슈즈 nga도 줘라 nga 텔레 레레레레 네 코노 도쇼 테드 냠비 슈르레레 테고라 가르치는 제로 차고 말라
So each one of these forces has a brother force.
The shuk hande je ne shuk chala yor la du chi gi jel ni ba jora ya chi yang yo res.
Which is equal in strength and opposite in direction.
Ta thanda ni yor la du gala thangbo da ni wa le ra di khorani khande yor la na shuk di chanyom che chi bo ji gyan che ni ta na shi do cho di ta wa na kha cho do de yo res.
This force, the brother of this force, is going to appear on the diagram for the floor.
The di thanda di ya chi indu ya shimba jura cha suela. Di call lir lana remove the teo baina thanda sa judo di gal remove the ligres.
The brother of this force will appear on the diagram for the floor.
Hanashi digi ya chi jura di shu di call remove call lir loina nangazu sai thanda remove tira dinan sugres.
The brother of this one will appear on the diagram for the rope.
Hanashi di nyam do ya chi lira di call lir loina nangazu thakbe gi remove tira dinan sugres.
The brother on this one will appear on the diagram for Tashi.
The Tashi che do ya remove tira di nala ani digi thanda da shimbash lira di phagina sugres.
The brother of this one will appear on the diagram for the planet Earth.
The digi ya chi gyora ya di thanda remove harina lir loina se khole che do remove tira di nala sugres.
But here we are not summing these forces that appear on different objects.
Ta thande charla ta thanda ngubu loga galele de ra di sangmanyam do donggu yo mares.
Here what we are summing, to decide what happens to the box, we only care about the forces that are exerted on the box.
Thande char nganzu ita thunang tesa cho di khari cha de lana gam gal shu khari le me jora di chupu tag yo res.
Is that okay?
Di seo cha selas. So he's saying the same. He's asking the same questions. Forces arise in pairs. So if there is upward force, there should be downward force as well. So why, after combining all this, it's not becoming zero?
The forces arise in pairs. All forces arise in pairs.
The shu khande ji bene samacha nani yo res lago res ra.
And each one of those interactions has forces that are pointing in opposite directions.
Ta penjun dewa chidu gala shugni di khari lana khacho do de ji yo res.
But each one of those forces is exerted on different objects.
Ta ne shu gyasa jora ngobo loga gya de res.
So we are not summing all the forces. We are not summing 10 forces here.
Ta thande charla ta waina ta shu chu domgu yo mares thanda dina.
We are only summing the forces that are exerted on the box.
Thande charla nganju chi khare chibu jagor lana gam gal shu khaju gya me jora di chibu domgu yo res.
We are asking, why isn't the box moving?
Nganju thiwa di khare le de lana gam di kharjin yogu chigu yo mare la jora dille de res.
We don't care what Tashi is doing.
Thanda tashi khare chigu me dil thunang khe chigu yo mares.
We don't care what the planet is doing.
Se kholai khare chigu me jora di thunang chigu yo mares.
We don't care what the floor is doing.
Pyana she shaladi khare chigu me dilai thunang chigu yo mares.
We are asking, why isn't the box moving?
Tanganjo thiwa chigran jili yo res di khar lena gam di kujo khajin tangyu yo mare la di thiwa di cha de res.
So, to answer the question about the box, we only care about the forces exerted on the box.
Dila du ta thanda nganjo thiwa di khar lena gam di khajin kujo tangyu yo mare la du wala ta gam di da thegar dewa chagyo ra gam di shu khaju gya me jora di chipu jitsi jagyo res.
So we only care about one of the two brothers from each family of forces.
Dila du gal ta nganjo nami roj syo aina ta chuju ni rola sa di shugni yo ra di ni la du gal thanda phaju di dewa chagyo mares nganjo gam gal shu khaju gya me ju butagyo ra di du gala di ni ne chik di cement ani chik di tagyo res. Gam gal shu khaju gya me di chipu lingyo res.
If I think about all the forces in the universe, all those forces arise in pairs.
Ta jigden kham nan cha shawaina ta shuk mangbu ju res shuk khande ji lembai na changma chala ne ju cha de res.
And so the sum of all those forces will be zero.
Dila du ani shuk changma domba imbai na changma ta du lego cha res.
But if I'm thinking about a specific object,
ine ngobu chikran chikrang la samlo tang wainas shisha wainas.
I only care about the forces exerted on that object, not by that object.
Dila dugala ngobu digala shu khaju gay me di chupu tagir madu ngobu digi shen la shu khaju gay me di tagyo mares.
This is a very important point. And it's a wonderful question.
Tiwa di yabu dusara ni kechumbu shu chagyo res di handa nedundi.
To give you a little bit more practice, to think about which forces do we care about, we are going to do another example.
Ta thanda khari sil ta ngaju chi ge gi ta shu khandi lengu gu yor la jura di ta la ta jongda ro ya pesu shimba ji shagi yins.
So here we have another situation. Maybe this situation happens in each of your rooms.
Di nedan shimba ji res di nedan di peje kiran zo changma sha na la di nedan di yugi res.
You have a table.
Chokze yor was
How many of you have a table in your room?
sha na la chokze yin khaju yor las.
How many of you have a book on that table?
Chokze gal thep sha yor din khaju yos.
How many of you sometimes have two books stacked on top of each other?
Ani kabre thep chi gal chik chik ni sha yor din sha yor khaju yos.
So this is a familiar situation.
Dila di nedan din gyun di thon de nedan ji cha de yor was.
We want you to make two force diagrams, two different diagrams.
Ta thande di nedan ji do dila ani shu gi thanda remote ye jo remote ni thiye yis.
But we can start with the first one. This is book 1, the top book, which is a little bit bigger than the book below, book 2.
Ta dina remote la thep ni te res gang la sha gyo di thep che res wo di chung res.
What would be the force diagram for book 1?
Ta shu gi remote te la du gala ngo bu chik ling yo thanda gam thang di thep thang bo di gala shu gi remote la na khandes chi chai res.
And this time what we want you to do, to take your whiteboard and divide it into sections based on how many people are in your group.
Ta nye ni chha na shi carbon su su ruga la chik yora ruga na mi khazu yo na shi di carbon di thumbu su ne ani kiran su remote sha ro chis.
And for each person in your group should have their own diagram.
An mi re la su su gi remote re gu gu yo res.
For now, right? But for now, don't worry about book 2.
Ta shu yo da yora penju thanda di gala shu khari gal thunang chi orla na thep thangbo di gala shu khari gya me jora di ta gu res.
Draw the diagram for book 1.
Thep thangbo ju yo di gala shu khari li me di gya gu res.
So right now we are just drawing the force diagram for book 1.
Ta thanda ngazu remote che jora di remote che di book thanda thep thangbo ju yo di dan te remote di chi bu thigi yo res.
So since we know that forces arise out of interactions with other objects, interactions between book 1 and other objects,
Ta thanda ngazu thanda shuk di tungu la di khadu lagor la na thanda thep thangbo di da an ngobo shamba thedu gala shuk di tungu yo ros.
the question that we can ask that is a helpful question is, with which other objects does book 1 interact?
Ta thanda thep thangbo di thegi la ora di khari da the de res khari da de cha yo res. Ngobo shamba khari with the book 2
With book 2, any other objects?
an ngobo thanda thep ni ba sung ra thaga na she ni ngobo shamba yo res thesa. No other object. No other object.
How about Earth?
Say kola yo mares. Ha penju dewa che jora di lagor thanda di. Penju ta ngobo shimpa nyam do dewa che jora. The lan thanda rek bodi mare. Ha chu dewa che jora penju di. Ta thanda thep ni ba di ro. An di memba ngobo shimpa yo res la ra. Say kola nyam do dewa yo res. Thep thangbo di. Yes, it interacts with the earth.
So book 1 interacts with book 2 and with Earth.
다 탭 당보디 거리다 제대로라나 탭 니워디 체 대가나시 세 콜라 제어 차되어스.
So let's draw those forces that come out of those interactions, the forces exerted on book 1 only.
따다나 펜주 뭐부 펜주 제어 치기도 디 제어 낭시 대가나시 다 슈중교라 슈중교디 슈갸사 콜라라나 단데 리모디날 거리지 부통 걸라나 탭 당보주야 딜레 슈갸 유디지 부통 해레스.
There are almost 80 monks in the room, so we want to see 80 drawings.
ता दूसता दुगला कुशो गेजुस दूस सिंगानाला दिला दुगला ता मिरेरे गे रिमु चिक चिक थिना रिमु गेजु छवि रेस ठेलन देवा पेन्सुन देवा छे चोकजे दिला so you said book 1 interacts with the earth so he feels that book 1 interacts with the table as well.
How does it interact with the table?
디 아니 쪽제 다 저 차기 둘라이저라 디 컨데스 차기 레스 because book 1 is interacting with the earth without touching each other, right? So likewise book 1 is not touching table, so he feels that these two interact.
Can that table interact with me right now?
파츠 저 제저라 페이 쪽제 디다 단다 스타메데스 코라니 디 핀주 저 차기 요르웨스 no.
So why can it interact with me now?
다 단다 저 차기 요르웨스 쪽제다 디
How
파라
about now?
단다
How about now? How about if I'm over it?
and this dewaina
Remember that Sonam is not interacting with the box.
소놈 코라 저 차기 요 마르와스 단다 감디냠도
It is the rope that is pulling the box.
따디 감탱이 디 거리 차되or라나 탁바디레스
So Sonam is pulling on the rope,
따 탁바 탱이 수 차되or라나 소놈 기 탱기 요레스
and the rope is pulling on the box.
탁바 디기 감디 탱기 요레스
Similarly, the table is interacting with book 2,
딜라드 디 네당조 쪽제 디당 탭니버지도 디니 핀주 저 차되어레스
and book 2 is interacting with book 1,
탭니워디 탭 당보냠도 저 차되어레스
but the table is not reaching up to interact with book 1.
딜라드 쪽제 디다 탭 당보디 디니냠도 핀주 저 용해주라디 치유 마레스 탄데디나 탭 당보디 슈제 쪽제 갈라 쪽제 갈라 so like is there a force acting on table by book 1 is the question.
I would like you to hear this question.
디 치워디 가르실라나 탭 당보죠라 디기 탭 디 쪽제 디갈 슈 게게 요레요 마레스란 디 치워라 디 치워 봉해 보라.
The question was, is book 1 interacting with the table?
치워디 가르라나 탭 당보디 쪽제냠도 저 차기 두에스 라이조라 디 로아스 탄다 펜주 저 체디
We said that the table is not interacting with me,
단다 디시 네단 델리로 오시템 바이나 캬ン주 셰바스 마라니 파라 핀주 저 멘두슬란 셰로스
can I interact with the table without touching it?
ता 마렉니 라모마 차니 디니 파라 저 핀주 저 리투레스 쪽제다 수부드
Also, we know from Newton's third law that if this is not interacting with that, that cannot be interacting with the table.
ता केसी मोबो디 न्यूटन 게 텐팀 숨바 차셔이나 디 केसी 디 당보디 냠도 체메어이나 대가나시 탭 당보디기 쪽제다 저와 차기요 마레스 펜주 저리. So what about the earth? What about the earth?
The earth reaches out and pulls on us without touching.
세 콜라이나 먼저 단다 탱도 니 탱 인지 민지 레고고 요 말레스
The earth reaches out and pulls on the birds without touching the birds.
다가난시 사요 콜레기 슈그조라 디기 단다 먼저 탱디 단다 남갈레 지오푸르디다 딜레기 슈그야 투요 레스
And the bird pulls up on the earth without touching the earth.
다가난시 슈 가주 겨난시 지우디기 팔라 슈그야 요 레스 인지 민지 레고고 요 말레스 디니 파
That is the nature of the gravitational force.
딜라도 단다 호랑이 단다 춘이로 차되레스 단다 랑시로지 단다 텐슈조라 디기 랑시 디덴데 도주레스
But a book cannot interact with the table if it is not touching the table.
이나야 탭 당고디 계시 단다 쪽제시도 디냠도 레기 메어이나 투구 메어이나 펜주되어 차기요 말레스 탭니버디 탭니버디 So it's interacting with the second book, right? The table.
It is in the book 1 is interacting with book 2.
탭 당보디 탭 니원님도 펜주되어 차되어 레스 So his question is these two interact with each other, right?
Book 2 interacts with the table.
탭 니워디다 쪽세니 펜주되어 차기요 레스
So let us draw.
What about the front cover? What about the front cover of the book, whether it's interacting with the table or not?
The front cover of the book? Of which book? Book 2?
Book 2, yeah.
The front cover of book 2 is interacting with book 1.
탭 니워기 단다 쇼디 강주야 디 차셔이나 탭 당보념도 되어 차되어 레스
And it is also interacting with the table.
이네 탭 니워 호란따오이나 탭 당보념도 되어 차기어 레스 대한항시 쪽제딩념도 되어 차기어 레스
So if this is book 2,
디 탭 니워 인바이나스
this part interacts with book 1,
탭 디 차시 디도아 디 탭 당보념도 디 되어 차되어 레스
and this part interacts with the table.
디 워지도아 디 탭 디 쪽제딩념도 대 펜주 되어 차 His question is what about the middle part? 근데 기말라나 근데 디 차장 지 What about the middle page?
They're going to dissect forever.
So the question is, how about the individual pages?
어떻게란 저기 주어 가슬라나 쇼글레 레레 따와이나 디 카렐라니 주어리 두스
Page number 37
쇼글레 숨주 섭딘지 도스
is interacting only with page number 35, 36 and 38.
다 쇼글레 숨주 섭딘 주어이나 숨주 섭딘 디 카리다 펜주 되어 차고라나 쇼글레 숨주 소주 주라 디다 숨주 섭게 다 되어 차디어레스
Okay, so let's finish drawing the diagram for book 1.
어떻게란 저 단다 리모트 예지요 탭 당보갈로 쇼 가지 디 당보 들어치스
And I want to give you a hint to get started. A hint to get started.
당보 고츠에 라타 다로 다든 춘주지 구구요로스
We only care about book 1.
디 다든 디 카리 라와이나 먼저 카리갈 티어 라와이나 단다 두낭치서 탭 당보 주야 디 찍고 두낭치 구구요레스
So just draw book 1 only.
디 인두갈라 리무나라 탭 당보 주야 디 찍고 구구요레스
You don't need to draw anything else. I mean, you don't draw any other objects. Just draw book 1.
당고보 계제 시어이나 탭 당보 랑라 두낭치란 시라 탭 당보 찍고 티에레스 안 고보 심바 켜고지 티에요 말레스
Remember that this is the situation,
내당 디레스 단다
but when you make your force diagram, draw book 1 and then draw the forces.
이네 슈기 리모트 라디 간다 간조 카릴 두낭치라는 탭 당보 두낭치라라 내당다 대화라레 템바네 샤로치스 이네 리무나 마밥도 갈라 탭 당보디 찍고지 안 대화나시 디단 제외 슈그저라 디 찍고지 티로치스
So I see many good diagrams throughout the room.
Ta di jinghan de ma ta du gala ani rimu yapu mangbu shi thong sos.
I think we're starting to develop the skills and practice of this part of science.
Ta di rimu che da cheri gi thanda jongdar jera chebu di kiran zo yaw zel di yaw du dus.
So if this is our book 1,
Di thep thangbo di res manzu.
how many forces are acting on book 1?
Ta thep thangbo gala shu ge jora di khazu res. 2 forces.
Ni. Oh, some people say 2 and some say 3. I've heard a few 3s.
Ta khash mangche ni le do khashi ni le do khashi sum le do stila.
So let's go through and let's look at all the forces we think we have.
Ta thanda ngaju samchula shuk sum yor lara da khazu yo di changma thanda ngaju ta is.
Give me one of the forces you think is there.
Ta shuk khari yor samgu dos chicks shedas thangbo di. Gravitational force.
The gravitational force. So we're going to write that as a downward arrow.
Ta ten shuk la du gala ma shuk di ma thigi is remudi.
And we write a big F.
Dila an ngaju gi F chungush thigi yo higi di thigi is.
G.
Di ten shuk indu gala gangla G thigi yo di thigi res.
And this is on
Di shuk di khari gangla yore.
on book 1. We only care about book 1, so all the forces we draw, they're going to be on book 1.
Ta thanda ngaju remudi na la thunang chisa so di khari gang ke she de re thep thangbo la du gala thep thangbo gala shuk khari ge me jora di chipu ji thunang che res.
So every single force we draw, it's only going to be on book 1.
Di la du shuk khaju lembai na thanda ngaju shuk ke shi ra thep thangbo da de jora shuk thep thangbo gala shuk khari li me di chipu res.
Single point concentration on book 1.
Dila du ne chik la ngaju thunang che jora da undi thep thangbo di cha de res.
What is the brother of this force?
Ta digi nyam do thobo ji ta jojo rola na chik yore lan she sa cha ya chik yora di khandi cha yore res. Thep korang gala force on the book la thep korang gala shu. Isko chik se thamanyam do la ko thep ni ba force on book 2. Thep ni ba gangla lai ba thep ni ba ki lai thep ni ba gangla thep ni thanda di thyo har lana.
Oh, I forgot. He reminded me. I forgot to say, what is exerting this force on book 1?
Ale di marsha thyo nyendi di thep thangbo jora thyo gora di chish thep thangbo di gala shuk gangi khandi cha de res say kola.
Thank you. So this is the force of gravity on book 1 by our Earth.
Ta thep thangbo gala shuk gyagyo ji chera shuk gyage sur lana say kola cha de res.
What other force is acting on this book?
Ta di maim ba ya shuk shimba khari res thep di kal gyage. Upward force
Upward force.
gangla yor sung ra.
How big should I make that arrow if I draw an upward force?
Ta gangla yor le jora di ta shuk suen la dash thi ya da dringlu khagas thu bu res.
Like this?
The same length.
Like this?
Dinde do re la string tum.
So make it the same, okay? So this is a force.
Di shuk ruas
It's acting on what? Object.
shuk di ngobo khari gal gya de res. On book 1
Even I understood that on book 1. Deb chick. By what? What's causing this force?
shuk gyagin jora di khandi cha de res. Book 2 by book 2.
Some of you think there's a third force.
Ta kinzo khashi gi thanda khari shir la na thando yengyo shuk sumba jore she soas. Some
No?
are saying no.
What-
Frictional force.
So if there's a third force, what do you think it is?
Ta sumba jio aina khandi res shuk. Frictional force.
There's a frictional force. Which way is that frictional force going?
Ta darshu yor la na chog juting gu ra shuk di chog ho tung ges. No frictional force.
Okay. So I saw one group and they drew a frictional force like this.
Tagi ruwa chik thong sung las darshu thi shas ra an darshu ki cho de tön shas.
So, but you can dispute this in a few ways.
Thanda digal chöba ge yo resta mendra thoni yo thanda di darshu digal.
Why would it be just in this direction?
Ta chöba ge du gala di cho di rang khachin re la jora di li ruwa chik thiwa.
Why not this direction?
Cho di jo khachin mares la jora.
So that's one way you could think about, be a little suspicious.
Tis thopa se ta samlo ta chik de ta yo res.
The other way you might be suspicious is, well, if this is a frictional force in this direction, where's its brother force?
Ta darshu di jo yor la na di nyam do ya chik thanda cha di yo ya shemba di kho yo res.
We know that forces come in pairs.
Na shu la di chal ni yo ha gu yo ras.
So unless someone is here pushing on the book, we don't have a frictional force.
Chik chilo ni yab ni binge jora tende mewa ina darshu yo mares. Thanda del binge yo mares.
So we don't have this third force.
Chezan di sumbaj do di yo mares dina.
But this force has the potential to arise if somebody starts pushing on book 1.
Ine di shuk di twin tour res khadu twin tour la na chigi bija ta go so ina di shuk di li ke res.
But in this situation, we don't have that frictional force.
Ine thanda nedang dinang la darshu di yo mares.
We're going to let you go for today, but we want you to think about something that we will start first thing tomorrow morning.
Ta thanda chodin di jam sha is ine sangi khari chigu me digal samlo tan chue is.
What about book 2?
Ta samlo di khari tang ur la na theb ni wa jora digal shu khari me jora ta undi.
And if you were to draw the diagram for book 2,
Ta theb ni wa jora digi remote chigu gu nas.
what would that look like?
Ta di remote na khande ro chag res. Theb ni ba gal shu kya jo jora di remote wa ina. Theb thangbo ji tha so ni ba ga china khande stig res.
Think about it tonight.
Le thanda di zina na la thudur che marsha. Thanda gonda nangle ro so samlo ta is theb ni ba diga.
And we'll talk about it tomorrow.
And di tola sangi thudur na is.
Have a good evening.